Hi, this is my review of classic Battletech Starterbook, Sword and Dragon. Because nothing says Battletech like two men in their mid-50s trying to kill each other while wearing what appears to be 80s gym clothes. Actually, mech warriors have to be dressed like that to withstand the heat inside of their battle mechs. If you don't know what Battletech is, I highly recommend that you watch my review of the introductory box set. I'm going to put a link in the description and on this video so you can watch it. The Sword and Dragon starter book is a complete campaign for you to participate in some of the conflicts and skirmishes of around the succession wars. Now let's talk about the quality of the physical book. I have one major criticism of this book, and it's that the pages are already starting to fall apart. I'm going to see if I can get into focus a line that is a telltale sign that thinks that this book is not going to last for long. I'm going to have to be really careful with it. You can see that line over there. And this is quite troublesome because at the end of the book you have the sheets for the different battle mechs. This is printed in normal paper, but you need to photocopy them unless you want to take some time filling a blank sheet. You need to photocopy them, and that's quite inconvenient because just listen to this. Let me see if I can get a better sound. Oh, the book is kind of betraying me right now because sometimes I open it and you hear like it's falling apart. And let me see. Well, you get the point. If you try to photocopy this thing, you're going to have to open your book quite a bit and it starts to fall apart. So that's a bit of a problem. I'm not satisfied with the binding of the book. Despite that, even though it's soft cover, the cover is pretty sturdy and the quality of the pages is good. The paper is semi-glossy except for the last part, which is normal paper. The graphic design is good, everything is well organized and written, and there are some illustrations and photographs of different miniatures, and I will be showing you some of the illustrations and photos as I go into the review. Now let's talk about the contents. In Sword and Dragon, you see the conflicts between two factions and two units. There are the Fox's Teeth from House Davion and Sorenson's Sabers from House Kurita. As I was telling you, this happens around the succession wars. So everybody's trying to take control of the inner sphere. And so these are the conflicts between House Davion and House Kurita, how each of them is trying to get the upper hand, trying to invade the other. They're constantly probing and poking their adversaries to see if they find some weak spots at the frontier of their sphere of influence. So you either can play as the as House Davion's unit, the Fox's Teeth, or Sorenson's Sabers from Kurita. Right at the start, you have a couple of pieces of fiction that are quite exciting. I like them quite a bit. They are pretty immersive. You can see the different trouble and issues that each unit has to go through, or their commanders and their members. Because, for example, on the side of the Fox's Teeth, you see how Ian McKinnon... Oh, sorry, but before we go further, this review is going to contain some spoilers. That is, I'm going to talk about some of the things presented in this section of the timeline and some details concerning the character biographies. So keep that in mind. Ian McKinnon on the side of the Fox's Teeth, he has trouble because his brother is an alcoholic, and during a training exercise his brother is kind of like recovering from a hangover, and he's not in top condition, and then they get attacked by surprise. So you can see that struggle, how they not only they have to focus on their mission and their objectives, they also have to deal with their personal issues, in this case family issues. But this is also a story of redemption, and you can see how his brother, despite his vices, surprises everyone in the end, remarkably so. And on the side of Kurita, on Sorensen's Sabers, you can see how the Tai, that is the commander of the unit, Daniel Sorensen, has a very critical dilemma before him. He either obeys some very draconian orders, or he goes after a traitor. And the Draconis Combine, and that is House Kurita, does not tolerate disobedience. You could get killed if you disobey orders. So he takes the choice that he considers to be the right choice, which is going after the traitor and eliminating him. But he gets severely penalized. He is actually quite lucky he did not get court-martialed. So his reputation is kind of like tarnished because of that. So you can see how each of the different forces in this starter book have their own problems, and they really have to think about the consequences. For example, in the case of Sorensen's Sabers, you had to think if you wanted to get a positive effect on the short term, or an even fight for an even greater good for the Draconis Combine in the long run, even though it would cost you your rank and station. Then the book goes into the introduction on how to use this book using the introductory rules in the box set or the full rules of the Total Warfare core rulebook. So if you, no matter if you are a beginner or an advanced player, you can get quite a bit of enjoyment from this book using the partial or complete rules. And then they give you some information about different factions, how they are described in the book. They also promote the miniatures. Let me show you some of the images here. These are the fox's teeth, and these have a bit of a European flavor to them. And then we have the Sorensen's Sabers. They feel more like Japanese. If you can see, there's kind of like a mech that looks like a samurai. And after that brief introduction, you get a history of House Davion and House Kurita, all about their origins and the role that they play in the succession wars. You have a really clear map showing you the borders. House Kurita is in red and Davion is in yellow. And as you can see, each one is trying to get into the territory of the others in the inner sphere, trying to poke or probe their way into the other one's territory. Because this is all about the skirmishes fought during those probing moments. Then you have specific information on Fox's teeth. Now there is a very strong sense of contrast between Fox's teeth and Sorensen's Sabers. On the side of the Fox's teeth, they feel like they are always in an advantageous position within their specific faction, and sometimes they do face some hiccups in their career, but they're constantly keeping this level. And in the case of Sorensen's Sabers, it's quite the opposite. It feels a bit like a roller coaster. In a sense, they feel like underdogs, and sometimes they are doing really well, and sometimes they just plunge, specifically because of what I told you of that decision that Daniel Sorensen took of going after the traitor, even though his superiors told him not to. So on the side of House Kurita, they're constantly like, of Sorensen's Sabers going up and down all the time. So there's a bit of contrast between the different units. And then you have information on the members, the commanders and members of the different units. First you have Ian McKinnon. He is the commander captain of the Fox's Teeth. Ian McKinnon is quite reckless and daring, and he comes up with some really unusual and unexpected strategies, but he is quite respected for it. Something that I also like of Battletech is that it's quite realistic when it comes to the age of these characters, because you're not only going to find like teenagers in the main characters, you're going to find some pretty mature characters. For example, Ian McKinnon is 55 years old, so that adds a bit more realism to the story. And next we have George Litton. And George is basically the bodyguard of Ian McKinnon. He comes from a line of bodyguards. Now remember that in Battletech, it feels at times a bit like a feudal system of sorts, or science fiction feudal type of thing. So you could compare them to knights and the retainers at times. And George Litton is so devoted to his role of protecting Ian McKinnon that he even dies during a particular section of the timeline. But before dying, he actually warns Ian McKinnon of a traitor of a spy, the assassin, who's going to kill him. It's kind of like, look out behind you or something. They don't go into specific details. Maybe there's a story that goes further into it. And then we have Austin Vorster. And at first he was like the typical rookie, but as he gained experience, he became like a very wise veteran in the force. And when Ian McKinnon retires, Austin Vorster is the one who stays behind like a wise uncle, giving advice to the newcomers of the unit of Fox's Teeth. Then you have Daniel Whalen. Now Daniel Whalen has been the victim of prejudice. He has had to fight quite a bit to protect himself, as expected of a victim of discrimination. And so he developed a bit of a reputation as a maverick, but nonetheless he is quite skilled as a mech warrior and was taken into the unit because of it. Maybe it's because Ian McKinnon is a bit of a maverick himself, but you can see how he takes under his wing some of the most reckless pilots. And then we have Paul Danton. He's kind of like the perhaps stereotypical or archetypical aristocrat in Battletech. He's all about looking for prestige, trying to get into the more successful positions. He's only in the Fox's Teeth unit because there isn't a more prestigious position available at the moment, and he's always using his wealth to get the best when it comes to battle mechs. All of the different biographies come with the battle mechs that they pilot. And then we have Hiroshi Pende. Now Hiroshi Pende, he wasn't too enthusiastic about becoming a mech warrior. He actually does not like conflict and fighting, and he only got into that position because his brother died in battle. So he's somewhat of a jumpy and nervous guy. He doesn't withstand stimuli too well, that is explosions and lights and all the violent stimuli. He's not effective in the battlefield. They say that he has this look of a deer cutting the headlights almost all the time, and later on he actually dies in combat because he cannot keep that sense of, what would you say, of coolness, or at the very least steadiness to mitigate damage during a conflict. And then we have Dave Tiny Hill. He is quite knowledgeable in politics and psychological warfare, and he is an atheist, and he constantly gets into philosophical debates and discussions with this other guy over here who is, let me see his name, Henrik Decker. Because Henrik Decker is a bit of a fanatic. He's constantly saying passages of the Old Testament. He can get so, what would you say, annoying, to the point that if they ever get the frequency of the communication system of the enemy, they can actually tap into their communication system, and they have Henrik Decker start saying passages of the Old Testament, and that actually confuses the enemies and even paralyzes them, because each of these mech warriors have their own special abilities. And then you have Ross McKinnon, and he's the son of Ian McKinnon. He has been groomed to be a mech warrior since he was very young, and he's more politically active than his father, so it was obvious that he should take the position of leadership, but some strings have to be pulled for him to get to that position. He's also as reckless as his father, or perhaps even more, so sometimes he gets into a bit of trouble, but nonetheless he's a good commander overall. And then we have Mateo Alvarez. And Mateo Alvarez suffered a bit of injustice. He's a scout, but he was not present when there was this really dangerous confrontation, and so they labeled him as a coward. But that was not true, it was not his intention, so he had to work really hard to prove that he was brave and he was still as involved in the battle as everyone else. And then we have Robert Gray, who is probably the most skilled mech warrior of the entire book. But it kind of goes hand in hand that he's a bit of a I hunt alone, I need not no one. He has that kind of attitude. And he also has violent mood swings, to the point that Ross McKinnon has actually advised that he gets some therapy. He feels like he got stuck in the past, like he's 45 years old and he has not accepted the changes through the timeline of Battletech. And then we have Sarah Lytton, and she is the daughter of George Lytton, the bodyguard of the McKinnons, so she continues the family tradition. However, as you can see, she kind of looks like someone's kid sister, so she doesn't look like really tough, but she's actually an expert in hand-to-hand fighting, and she has rescued Ross McKinnon several times during different ambushes because of his reckless behavior, and later on they actually get married. And then we have the information on Sorensen's sabers. Now, as you may remember, Daniel Sorensen and his entire unit fell out of the dragon's grace when he decided to chase that traitor against his superior's orders. And he was actually successful. He managed to kill a traitor, so it seems really unfair that they punish him so. So all of the Sorensen sabers were assigned to duties that no one else wanted to carry out. So did you feel that, again, that sense of underdog, trying to get back into the good graces of the Draconis Combine of House Kurita? So we have Daniel Sorensen, also really skilled as a pilot, and he is very charismatic, and he is all about regaining his honor and cleaning his reputation. In fact, when he first started fighting as a mech warrior, he actually just went in there with plans of revenge because his father was killed and he was looking for his father's killer. But later on, because of the influence of his uncle Ivan, he got a greater sense that there was something bigger than his own needs or personal goals, and he decided to become faithful to House Kurita. So he devotes his entire life to that, and he's also a family man. Later on in the story, he actually dies living a peaceful family life, although he died quite young, in my opinion. Then we have Grace Shiro. And Grace Shiro, as you can see, she's quite ugly, and they say that she has the mouth of a merchant. So it's sad because she actually wants to get a husband, but her personal life has been quite a bit of a mess, and the only relationship that she had it with a spy, so things didn't go too well for her. Nonetheless, she's still an excellent pilot. Then we have Emory Wilk. Now, Emory Wilk is a bit psychologically scarred because he was the victim of a betrayal of getting attacked from behind, so he never got over that situation. But nonetheless, that actually enhanced his abilities as a mech warrior. He's always looking behind his back, and so it's really difficult to get him caught unaware. And then we have Shakir Gerard. Now, Shakir is a very interesting character because pretty much no one in the unit knows it, but he was actually sent as a spy to keep tabs on Daniel Sorensen. So he's trying to see if Daniel Sorensen is actually loyal to the Draconis Combine, and if he's going to carry out his duty despite being demoted and relegated to those duties that nobody else wants. And the funny thing is that Shakir and Daniel Sorensen actually became really good friends, even though Daniel never knew in his entire life that Shakir was always spying on him. And then we have Dana Utsunomiya. Now, Dana is somewhat of a simpleton. You can't have a philosophical or intellectual conversation with him, but he is the best at acquiring parts as a bit of a scavenger. And when you need repairs, he is the man you go to. And then we have Andrew Martin, and he is somewhat of a mystery because he's actually a very mediocre mech warrior. He has been threatened to being put out of the unit if he doesn't improve his abilities. And even though, as you can see, he's not exactly the best looking guy, he's a chick magnet, as you would say. And then we have Sharon Burgos. Now Sharon is a very violent and manipulative woman, but maybe there is a reason to that as well. She's also very paranoid, but she went after a traitor because it seems like everyone wants to betray the Dragonist Combine. She went after a traitor and killed him with her own hands during a fight using mechs, but they say that he was actually her lover, so there is a bit of conflict there, and she is somewhat of a conflictive character. Then we have Seila Teresa Martinez. Now Seila Teresa Martinez, she had a bit of a struggle when developing as a mech warrior. All of her instructors tried to fail her, but she managed to overcome those obstacles. And she had a happy career, you would say, fighting alongside her husband, but they were used as expendable reconnaissance, and during that, what would you say, deadly encounter, her husband died and her teammates as well, so she punched her superior, her Tai, and she was demoted and transferred to Sorensen Sabers, which kind of like the unit of outcasts. And then we have Albert Benton. Now, Albert Benton is a pretty average guy. Nothing seems special about him, but he's actually a great engineer and somewhat charismatic despite things. And he becomes commander after Daniel Sorensen retires, but that seems a bit like a puzzling choice in my opinion, because you never get a sense like he's a really good strategist or tactician. And then we have Jasmine Rubach. And Jasmine, she is the daughter of traitors. Because of that, she grew up with a stigma. She was raised by her grandparents, but almost nobody trusts her, so she's working really hard to prove that she is different from her parents. Actually, there's something I don't like about this illustration. You cannot tell it too well here in this camera, but her arms lack any detail, because for example, if you take a look at the illustration of Benton over here, you can see how his arm has shadows and some highlights and such, but her arms are just like plain pink. It's kind of like the artist forgot to add some highlights and shadows. And even on the right arm, you cannot, if you look really closely, you can see that it's a bit cropped. So it felt a bit rushed, that illustration. And then we have Elden Verardinelli. Now, he used to be a really skilled fighter pilot, but he got shot down once and he never recovered from that. Maybe that scar or burn mark on his face is the result of that. So he decided to become a mech pilot instead. He's quite skilled, but he eventually had a spectacular death as well. Then we have James McPartland. Now, James was a pretty average guy. He had a bit of an easy life, wanted a normal, decent career, but he got into the wrong place at the wrong time, and he got associated with a prostitution ring. So his patriarch got really mad. He disowned him, and his only choice was to join the Sorensen Sabers, again that unit of outcasts. And he was a bit aimless until he rescued Jasmine during the battle of Bennett 3, and she was really thankful for that and quite expressive about it. So James kind of like developed a crush on her. So from then on, he became really driven to prove himself as a warrior so that she could fall in love with him. And they even said that he fights at times with the spirit of the dragons, which is quite like an honorable mention, considering that a dragon is a symbolic, the symbol of Hauskurita. So then we have a section which is the rules annex. You have information on advanced mech warrior abilities. So each of these warriors that I mentioned has different traits or skills or particularities that you can use during combat, because for example, as I was telling you, the one that is a fanatic decker, you can actually start saying passages of the Old Testament, and this kind of like paralyzes enemy mech warriors. Or in the case of Daniel Sorensen, your soldiers will not fall under the effect of the forced withdrawal rule in this campaign, unless he also leaves the battlefield. So he's quite charismatic and he's there to inspire others. And then you have other ones like Dana Utsunomiya. As I was telling you, he's a pretty good salvager, so between the different battles you can dedicate himself to getting less expensive repairs for your mechs. And in the case of, for example, Sarah Litton, as I was telling you, she's pretty good at spotting ambushes because she has been rescuing Ross McKinnon quite a bit. So it says here, she has an uncanny sixth sense for detecting ambushes. Once per game, Sarah may defer her movement until last, regardless of initiative order. So she's always one step ahead, to put it in a way. And all of the different mech warriors have something to bring to the table in terms of effectiveness. You also have battle mech quirks, because some of these mechs are very ancient. It's not easy to produce mechs all the time, at least in this particular section of the timeline. So a lot of them are quite old, and some of them have sensors that fail, they don't have good targeting systems, some of them overheat quite a bit, etc. Things like that. Then you have a really nice section on technical details and rules details concerning all of the equipment that you can use on your mechs. And this adds realism. You can see all the technical information, but also how you can use them during battles. And then you have information on how to run this Sword and Dragon campaign. Now, this campaign feels like it's going to be quite useful for the role-playing game as well. That is, if you play A Time of War, the official Battletech role-playing game, this book is also quite useful. But something that struck me a bit as uncommon is that even if you want to play this as an experience using the Battletech board game, you feel like a player is always playing the role of a game master. Basically, a player is kind of like running the stars of the show. Maybe you want to play things as if the Fox's Teeth were the main characters, or maybe the Sorensen's Sabers. So that player is going to be handling all of the different purchases and repairs and getting new mechs between different scenarios, and he's going to be choosing which scenarios to fight. And the other one is presenting the opposing forces. So in that sense, one player, if you are playing with two players, you can play it with more. But one player or one side of the things is going to feel like he's going to be the game master, and he's just there to present opposing forces. Not that it's not fun, but it doesn't feel like they are in the same situation. That is the player who controls the stars of the show, and the other one, that is the opposing forces player. So you have information on different record sheets, on the tracks, and special rules related to a campaign, like the forced withdrawal, what happens when the crippled damage is delivered. Sometimes dealing crippling damage could fulfill some objectives. You get information on how to salvage parts and details on off-map movement. You also have some random tables if you want to determine what types of mechs you're going to be fighting in the different scenarios. Also, this campaign feels really free-form. You basically fight a scenario, and depending on how well you perform during that scenario, you get war chest points. And you use those war chest points to buy ammunition, repair your mechs, perhaps get new mechs as well. And so it feels like a typical campaign, but as I was telling you, there are many opportunities to have some role-playing game encounters within the different battles. And you basically choose what tracks or what battles you are going to fight. Some battles are specific battles to different factions. So for example, if you are using the Fox's Teeth, you're going to be fighting some specific skirmishes that you cannot fight if you're controlling Sorenson's Sabers. So as I was telling you, it always feels like one player is the game master, because one player is the entire campaign is focused on one side of the conflict. So we have information on different unit cost, repair cost, information how to set up the campaign. Everything is very well laid out. However, I think I would have liked if they added some maps showing you how to handle things, because you can basically use any map sheets in your possession. You can use the ones that come with the introductory box set, or some of that you have purchased. Besides that, or maybe some that you have created yourself, but that feels a bit too loose at times in my opinion. I would have preferred it if they said, in this scenario you need to include mountains and lakes, or in this scenario don't include mountains and lakes, but use forests and roads and stuff like that, because sometimes you feel like there's a bit too much, a bit more structure would have made things a bit more clear. And you can basically stop the campaign whenever you like. So it's all up to you and your opponent. Maybe you want to say, oh, let's play this number of scenarios or skirmishes, and then the campaign comes to an end. But despite that, there is a lot of replayability in this book, because as I was telling you, each campaign has different scenarios. Depending on how you perform in different tracks, you're going to be fighting different battles. So you could basically play the same side several times, and things could develop differently. So there is a lot of replayability. Now let me tell you what I think of Sword and Dragon. I think this is a really good book, but there are some things that you need to be aware of. As I was telling you, well, I would recommend that you get the PDF, because I'm not satisfied with the binding. But when it comes to the content, if you're only playing the Battletech board game, you're going to love this book. But keep in mind that the structure is very loose. As long as you keep that into consideration, and you don't feel disappointed that, oh, I wanted a better pathway through different tracks and battles, because I don't want to be responsible of when the campaign ends and such. But as long as you keep that in mind, I think there is a lot of material here to fight some really exciting battles and build some stories while you are at it. But maybe some of you only play the A Time of War role-playing game. And if you only play the role-playing game, is this worth it? I think that it is, but there are no role-playing game encounters. That is, you have to come up with your own situations based on the events in the timeline, and perhaps you could have some encounters and adventures inspired on the outcomes of the battles in the campaign, on different results of the tracks. And if you own both the board game and the role-playing game like me, well, this is a must-have, because you're going to have a lot of material for years and years, perhaps. That's the cool thing of Battletech. It's so detailed, all of the years and different sections of the timeline. Everything is very well laid out, and you have a lot of seats for campaigns and adventures. If you wanted to, you could have some adventures and battles a bit before these particular skirmishes around the Succession Wars, or after that. So I highly recommend that you get a Sword and Dragon. Just keep those things in mind that I was telling you, that sometimes there is not a tight structure, and on the role-playing side of things, on the RPG side of things, you have to build your own adventures. But nonetheless, really, if you enjoy Battletech, this is the next step after getting the introductory box set. Well, thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.